I arrived home at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in November, exhausted from 4 days in Chicago at a conference I didn't want to attend. My rideshare pulled up to my house in Portland, and that's when I saw the lights, pulsing red and blue through my living room windows, music so loud I could feel the bass through the car door. My first thought was that we'd been robbed, that someone had broken in while my husband Robert and I were away. Except Robert wasn't away. He was supposed to be home. I grabbed my suitcase and stepped into the rain, and that's when I saw him. My 72-year-old husband was sitting on our front porch steps, not under the overhang where it was dry, out in the open, completely soaked, rain running down his face and through his gray hair. His flannel shirt was plastered to his body. He was shaking from the cold. And inside our house, strangers were having a party. I ran to him. "Robert, what are you doing out here?" He looked up at me with eyes I'd never seen before. Empty, resigned, like something inside him had simply given up. "Simone asked me to leave," he said quietly. "She said I was ruining the mood." Simone, our 26-year-old daughter, the girl we'd raised, supported, loved unconditionally for more than 2 decades. I pushed through the front door and found her in the center of our living room, phone held high, filming the chaos around her. Drunk strangers on our furniture, someone dancing on the coffee table, red cups everywhere, our Persian wedding rug bunched in the corner with dark stains I couldn't identify. "Mom!" She barely glanced at me. "You're back early. Where's your father?" She rolled her eyes. "Outside. He was killing the vibe. All that old man energy, you know." I stared at my daughter, this woman I thought I knew, and felt something crack open inside me. Not anger, something colder, something final. I pulled out my phone and made one call. 12 minutes later, the party was over. The music stopped, everyone scattered, and Simone stood alone in the wreckage, finally understanding that she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. What she didn't know, I wasn't just an angry mother. I was a senior partner at one of Portland's most respected family law firms. The house she'd just disrespected? It was in my name alone. And Robert wasn't just some old man killing her vibe. He was a retired civil engineer who designed half the infrastructure this city ran on. But none of that mattered as much as what happened next. Because when I told Simone she needed to leave, not just for the night, but until she figured out who she wanted to be, she said something that would haunt all of us. "Fine. It's your house anyway. He doesn't even own anything here." I watched my husband's face crumble, watched him realize that his own daughter saw him as worthless, as nothing more than space being taken up. And I had to make an impossible choice. Keep protecting my daughter from consequences, or protect my husband from being destroyed by the person who should have loved him most. I chose Robert. Simone moved in with a friend. Days passed. She sent occasional texts, defensive, self-pitying, still convinced she was the victim. Robert barely spoke, barely ate, moved through our home like a ghost of himself. Then, 9 days after I kicked our daughter out, my phone rang at 6:47 a.m. "Mrs. Dobson? This is Dr. Patel from Providence Portland Medical Center. Your husband collapsed during a routine checkup. His heart? The stress levels are dangerous. You need to come now." I drove to that hospital thinking about Robert sitting in the rain, about Simone's casual cruelty, about all the ways we'd failed as parents by being too soft, too accommodating, too afraid to let our daughter face the natural consequences of her actions. When I walked into his room and saw him hooked up to machines looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen him, I knew we couldn't go back to who we were. Something fundamental had broken, and the only question that mattered now was whether we could build something better from the pieces, or if we'd lost our daughter forever in the process of trying to save each other. The doctor's words kept echoing in my head. Emotional stress can kill just as surely as any physical disease. Whatever's happening at home needs to be resolved. But how do you resolve the unresolvable? How do you teach someone to value what they've spent 26 years taking for granted? How do you help your child become a good person when they've forgotten how to see other people as human? Simone arrived at the hospital 40 minutes after I texted her. She stood in the doorway of Robert's room, looking at her father. This man who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd sat through every dance recital, who'd loved her with a devotion she'd repaid with contempt. And I watched her face change, not with easy remorse, not with simple guilt, but with the slow, dawning horror of someone finally understanding the magnitude of what they'd done. "Is he going to die?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But you need to decide right now. Are you going to become someone worthy of his forgiveness? Or are you going to keep being the person who put him in this bed? She started to cry. Real tears, not the performative kind she'd perfected over the years. I don't know how. I don't know how to fix this. Then figure it out. Because I can't do it for you anymore, and neither can he. This is the story of what happened next. Of whether love is enough to bridge the gap between who we want our children to be and who they actually are. Of whether a daughter can learn to see her parents as people before it's too late. Of whether a man who spent his whole life building things for others can rebuild himself after being torn down by the person he loved most. This is the story of rain and ruins and the terrible grace of letting go. And it starts with a simple question I still can't answer. When does saving yourself become abandoning your child? The rain started just as my plane touched down at PDX. I watched it streak across the small oval window, distorting the runway lights into watercolor smears of yellow and white. November in Portland. It was the kind of rain that didn't announce itself with thunder or drama. It just settled in like an old tenant who'd never left, patient and persistent, soaking through everything until you forgot what dry felt like. I'd been in Chicago for 4 days. The Foster and Leibowitz Conference on Family Law Reform, the kind of event where you shake 200 hands, remember 10 names, and drink enough hotel coffee to fuel a small city. My partner, James Morrison, had insisted I go. Claire, you need to be seen. You're the best advocate for children's rights in the Pacific Northwest, but if you don't network, you're just the best kept secret. So I'd gone. I'd smiled. I'd given my presentation on parental alienation cases. I'd even had dinner with a judge from Seattle who might refer cases our way. But the whole time, part of me had been here in Portland wondering if Robert was remembering to take his blood pressure medication, if Simone had actually gone to that job interview she'd promised to attend. My daughter. 26 years old and still finding herself, as she liked to say. I preferred to call it stalling, but I'd learned to keep that particular opinion to myself. Robert was gentler with her. She just needs time, Claire, he'd say, his weathered hands folded over the evening paper, reading glasses perched on his nose. Not everyone figures it out at 23 like you did. I grabbed my carry-on from the overhead bin and followed the tired stream of travelers through the terminal. PDX smelled like coffee and rain-damp jackets. The carpet, with its iconic teal pattern, squished slightly under my heels. Outside, the rideshare pickup area was chaos. Cars circling, people hunched under inadequate umbrellas, everyone trying to get home. My Uber driver was a young guy, maybe Simone's age, with a timber scarf hanging from his rearview mirror. He asked about my trip. I gave him the abbreviated version. He told me about his plans to open a food cart. Filipino fusion, he said, something Portland didn't have enough of. I nodded in the right places, but my mind was already drifting toward home. We lived in the Irvington neighborhood, just northeast of downtown. Robert and I had bought the house 28 years ago, back when I was pregnant with Simone and he was still working at the engineering firm. It was a 1920s Craftsman with a wide front porch, built-in bookshelves, and windows that rattled when the wind picked up. The neighborhood had changed over the years, coffee shops replacing hardware stores, Teslas replacing Subarus, but our street still had that quiet, tree-lined charm that made you feel like you'd stepped back in time. As we turned onto 24th Avenue, I noticed the lights first. Not the warm yellow glow of our usual evening lamps, but something pulsing. Blue, then red, then green. The bass hit me next, even through the closed car windows. A rhythm so heavy it seemed to vibrate through the rain itself. Looks like someone's having a party, the driver said, grinning. My stomach dropped. He pulled up to the curb, and I sat there for a moment, just staring. Cars lined both sides of the street, parked haphazardly, blocking driveways. Our front windows glowed with that awful disco light, and shadows moved behind the curtains. Too many shadows, too many people. You okay, ma'am? I realized I'd been gripping the door handle. Yes. Thank you. I paid him, added a tip I didn't calculate, and stepped out into the rain. It was colder than I'd expected, the kind of wet that found its way through your coat and into your bones. I stood there on the sidewalk, suitcase beside me, and that's when I saw him. Robert. He was sitting on the porch steps, just outside the front door. Not under the overhang where it was dry, but out in the open, rain soaking through his flannel shirt, his gray hair plastered to his skull. His shoulders were hunched forward, hands clasped between his knees, and he was staring down at the wooden planks beneath him like he was trying to disappear into them. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This was my husband, the man who'd held my hand through 18 hours of labor, who'd taught our daughter to read, who'd built her a treehouse in the backyard, who'd slow danced with me in the kitchen on Sunday mornings when the light came through just right. And he was sitting in the rain, outside his own home. I left the suitcase on the sidewalk and walked toward him, my heels clicking on the wet pavement. "Robert?" He looked up, and the expression on his face nearly broke me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was something worse. Resignation. Like he'd accepted that this was just how things were now. "Claire." His voice was hoarse. "You're home early. What are you doing out here?" He glanced toward the door, then back at me. "Simone's having some friends over. She asked me to. Give them space." "Asked you?" He didn't answer, just looked down again. The music inside shifted to something even louder, all treble and distortion. Someone laughed, high and careless, and glass shattered, followed by a chorus of cheers. I didn't ask permission. I didn't knock. I pushed open the front door, my front door, and stepped into what used to be my living room. The smell hit me first. Beer and sweat, and something sweet and artificial, like cotton candy vape smoke. The furniture had been pushed against the walls. The rug, the Persian rug Robert's mother had given us as a wedding present, was bunched in the corner, stained with something dark. People I'd never seen before filled every available space. A girl in a crop top was dancing on our coffee table. 2 guys were taking shots on the kitchen counter. And in the center of it all, phone held high, filming everything with a grin that could have powered the whole city, was Simone. She was wearing a black dress I didn't recognize. Her dark hair swept up in a messy bun, makeup perfect. She looked beautiful. She looked like a stranger. "Mom!" She lowered her phone, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh my God, you're back early. I thought your flight wasn't until tomorrow." I stood there, dripping rainwater onto the hardwood floor we'd refinished 2 summers ago. "Where's your father?" She waved a hand dismissively. "He's fine. He was being weird, okay? Complaining about the noise, asking everyone to leave. It's a party, Mom." He was killing the vibe. Killing the vibe, I repeated slowly. "Yeah, I mean, come on. He's like 70-something. No one wants to party with..." She stopped herself, but the damage was done. "With someone old?" Simone sighed, dramatic and put upon. "I didn't mean it like that. I just asked him to hang out in his room or something. Give us a few hours. He's the one who decided to sit outside like a martyr." The word martyr hung in the air between us. Around us, the party continued. Someone turned the music up. A beer can rolled past my feet. I pulled out my phone. "What are you doing?" Simone asked, her voice shifting, sharpening. I scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in months. Gerald Pachek, retired Portland police sergeant, Robert's poker buddy. He answered on the second ring. "Claire? Everything okay?" "Gerald, I need a favor. I'm at home. There's an unsanctioned gathering, noise violation, possible underage drinking. Could you send a patrol car by, just to check things out?" "On my way." I hung up. Simone's face had gone pale. "Mom, what did you just... You can't be serious. Everyone needs to leave, now." "Mom, now, Simone." Something in my voice must have finally registered, because she turned to the crowd and clapped her hands. "Okay, everyone, party's over. You gotta go. Now." There was groaning, protests. "What? Come on! We just got here. This is bullshit. I said now." They moved slowly at first, grumbling, grabbing jackets and phones. Then the porch light from a patrol car swept through the windows, and suddenly they were scrambling, pushing toward the back door, climbing out windows. Within 5 minutes, the house was empty except for me, Simone, and the wreckage. The music was off. The lights were back to normal. And in the silence that followed, I could hear the rain outside, steady and unrelenting. Simone stood in the middle of the room, arms crossed over her chest. That was humiliating. Was it? "You didn't have to call the police, Mom. Jesus, I'm 26 years old." "Then act like it." Her jaw tightened. "I was just having fun. Is that illegal now?" "Your father is sitting outside in the rain, Simone. In November. Do you understand that? He chose to sit out there. I didn't force him. You told him he was ruining the mood. You made him feel unwelcome in his own home. It's your home, Mom. You're the one who pays for everything. Let's not pretend Dad owns anything here." The words hit me like a slap. I took a step closer. "Let me make something very clear to you. This house is in my name, yes. But your father and I built this life together. Every single thing you see here, every piece of furniture, every dish, every floorboard, we chose together. We earned together. And you've contributed nothing except entitlement and excuses. Simone's eyes filled with tears, but they were angry tears. Defensive. You don't understand what it's like. What's like? Being stuck. Watching everyone else move forward while I'm just here, okay? Still living at home, still figuring things out, still disappointing you. Then do something about it. I'm trying. Are you? I bent down and picked up a red plastic cup, still half full of beer. Is this trying? Throwing parties while your father sits in the rain? She didn't answer. I set the cup on the mantel and walked to the front door. Robert was still there, still sitting on those steps, rain running down his face. I grabbed a towel from the hall closet and went outside. Come on, I said gently, draping the towel over his shoulders. Let's get you inside. He stood slowly, stiffly, like his joints had frozen. I didn't want to cause trouble. You didn't cause anything, Robert. We walked inside together. Simone was still standing in the living room, but she wouldn't look at him, wouldn't meet his eyes. Simone, I said. She finally looked up. You need to leave. What? Pack a bag. Find somewhere else to stay tonight. I don't care where. But you're not sleeping here. Mom, you can't. I can. And I am. You need to think about what you did tonight. Really think about it. Not what you meant to do, but what you actually did. And until you understand the difference, I don't want you here. Simone stared at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. Then she looked at Robert, maybe hoping he'd defend her, soften the blow. But he just stood there, water dripping from his hair, towel around his shoulders, saying nothing. Fine, she said finally, her voice brittle. Fine. She grabbed her purse and her phone and stormed up the stairs. 10 minutes later, she came back down with a duffel bag, mascara smeared under her eyes. I'm going to Kelsey's, she said to no one in particular. I didn't respond, just watched as she opened the front door, stepped out into the rain, and disappeared into the night. When the door closed, the house felt impossibly quiet. Robert stood in the middle of the living room, looking around at the chaos. Overturned furniture, stains on the floor, red cups scattered everywhere, and I saw his shoulders start to shake. Robert, I'm just tired, Claire, he said softly. I'm so tired. I went to him then, wrapped my arms around him, and felt him lean into me. All that weight he'd been carrying finally finding a place to rest. And as I held him, I realized something. This wasn't about one party. This wasn't about one thoughtless comment. This was about years of small compromises, little erosions, moments where we'd let things slide because it was easier than confronting the truth. Our daughter had learned to take us for granted, and we'd let her. We're going to fix this, I whispered into his damp hair. I promise you, Robert, we're going to fix this. He didn't answer, just held on tighter, like he was afraid if he let go, he'd disappear entirely. Outside, the rain kept falling, and inside, we stood in the wreckage of what used to be home, knowing that whatever came next would require something we hadn't given enough of lately, the courage to demand better, not just for ourselves, but for the daughter we loved too much to keep rescuing. The clock on the mantel chimed midnight, and I thought about Simone, out there somewhere, angry and confused and convinced she was the victim in all of this. I thought about Robert, who'd spent 72 years learning how to be kind, how to be patient, how to forgive, and whether those virtues had been mistaken for weakness by the person who should have cherished them most. And I thought about myself, the lawyer who fought so hard for other people's families but had maybe neglected the hardest case of all, my own. Tomorrow, we'd start cleaning up. We'd assess the damage. We'd begin the long, difficult work of rebuilding something that had been crumbling for longer than I'd wanted to admit. But tonight, we just stood there, holding each other in the ruins, and let the silence say what words couldn't. That love, real love, isn't always gentle. Sometimes it's the hard truth delivered at the worst possible moment. Sometimes it's the door you close because leaving it open would destroy you both. And sometimes it's standing in the rain until someone finally notices you're drowning. Simone didn't come home the next day, or the day after that. I told myself it was fine. She was staying with Kelsey, her best friend since high school, the one with the studio apartment in the Pearl District, and a trust fund that made employment optional. Simone had texted once. I'm fine. Need space. 3 words that somehow managed to make me feel like the unreasonable one. Robert and I spent that first morning cleaning. He worked slowly, methodically, picking up red cups and wiping down surfaces like he was performing some kind of ritual. I tackled the stains, the wine on the rug, the beer rings on the coffee table, the mysterious sticky substance on the hardwood that required 20 minutes of scrubbing and half a bottle of Murphy's oil soap. Neither of us spoke much. What was there to say? The evidence of what had happened was everywhere, worked into the grain of our home like a bad memory you couldn't quite shake. By noon, my phone rang. James Morrison, my law partner. His voice crackled through the speaker, concerned but professional. "Claire, I heard you had some trouble at the house. You doing okay?" News traveled fast. Gerald must have mentioned it to someone who mentioned it to someone else. Portland's legal community was small enough that everyone knew everyone's business, and big enough that they pretended not to. "We're fine, James, just family stuff. Take the time you need." Patterson deposition got moved to next week anyway. After I hung up, Robert looked at me from across the room. He was holding one of Simone's old school photos. 3rd grade, missing front teeth, gap-toothed smile that could melt glaciers. "She used to be so sweet," he said quietly. "Remember? She'd bring me flowers from the neighbor's garden. Dandelions, mostly. She thought they were the most beautiful things in the world." I walked over and took the photo from him. That little girl, with her wild curls and scraped knees, seemed like a different person entirely from the woman who'd stood in our living room and called her father irrelevant. "She's still in there somewhere," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "Is she? Or did we just imagine the daughter we wanted instead of seeing the one we had?" The question sat between us like an unwelcome guest. That afternoon, I did something I'd been avoiding for weeks. I went up to Simone's room and really looked around. It was a museum of arrested development. High school trophies on dusty shelves, posters of bands she'd loved at 16, a corkboard covered in photos from college, back when everything had felt possible, and she'd talked about going to grad school, maybe becoming a therapist or a teacher. But the more recent evidence told a different story. Credit card bills stuffed in a drawer, unopened. Rejection letters from jobs she'd applied to half-heartedly, if at all. A journal on her nightstand, open to a page that simply read, "I don't know who I'm supposed to be." I sat on her bed, the same bed we'd bought when she was 12, the one with the carved headboard she'd picked out herself, and felt the weight of all the ways we'd failed her. Not by being cruel or neglectful, but by being too soft, too accommodating, too willing to believe that love alone could guide someone toward becoming a person of substance. My phone buzzed. A text from Simone. "Can I come get some of my things?" I typed back, "When? Tomorrow morning, around 10? Fine. No warmth, no emotion, just logistics." That's what we'd become. She arrived at exactly 10:03 a.m., fashionably late even in disgrace. I watched from the kitchen window as she parked her car, the Honda Civic we'd bought her for college graduation, the one she'd never made a single payment on, and walked up the front path like she was approaching enemy territory. Robert was at the kitchen table reading the Oregonian, pretending not to notice. But I saw his hand tremble slightly as he turned the page. When Simone came through the door, I was ready. I'd spent the night rehearsing this moment, trying to find the right words. Firm but not cruel, honest but not devastating. In the end, I realized there was no perfect way to tell your child that they'd disappointed you at a cellular level. "Hi," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Simone." She moved toward the stairs, but I stepped into her path. "We need to talk first." "Mom, I just came to get my stuff." "Your stuff can wait." She crossed her arms, defensive, closed off. "What do you want me to say? I'm sorry? Fine. I'm sorry." "For what, specifically?" For the party. For not asking permission." "That's not what you're sorry for." Her jaw tightened. "Then tell me what I'm supposed to be sorry for, since you clearly have the script written already." Robert set down his paper. "Don't talk to your mother that way." Simone turned to him, and something flickered in her expression. Guilt, maybe, or shame, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "I didn't ask you to sit outside, Dad. You chose to do that. You chose to be a victim." The air went out of the room. Robert's face went pale, and I watched something break behind his eyes, something that had been holding on by sheer force of will. "A victim," he repeated softly. "Is that what you think I was doing? Playing the victim? What else would you call it? Sitting out there in the rain, making everyone feel guilty. I was trying to give you space." His voice cracked, rare anger seeping through. "You asked me to leave. You said I was embarrassing you. So I left. What was I supposed to do, Simone? Go to a hotel? Drive around in the rain until you decided I was allowed back in my own home? It's not your home. It's Mom's." "Simone, stop." I stepped between them. "That's enough. No, let her finish. Robert stood, his chair scraping against the floor. Go ahead, Simone. Say what you really think. That I'm just some old man who doesn't contribute anything? That I'm just here out of your mother's charity? Say it. Dad, say it. Fine. Yes. Okay? Tears were streaming down her face now. Yes, I think you're just here. You don't work anymore. You don't do anything except putter around the house and read the paper and act like you're still important when everyone knows you're just taking up space. The silence that followed was suffocating. Robert stared at his daughter like he'd never seen her before, like she was a stranger wearing his child's face. Robert, I whispered, reaching for him. He shook his head and walked out of the room. A moment later, I heard the back door close. Not slam, close. Gently, carefully, like he was trying not to disturb anyone. Simone stood there, chest heaving, mascara running. I didn't mean... Yes, you did, Mom. You meant every word. And you know what the worst part is? I don't think you even understand why those words are so cruel. He's fine. He's always been so sensitive. Your father built half of this city's infrastructure, Simone. Do you know what that means? Those bridges you drive over? The water treatment facility that keeps your tap water clean? The Max light rail system you take downtown? Robert designed key components of all of them. He spent 40 years making sure this city worked, making sure people could get where they needed to go, making sure families had clean water and safe passage. And when he retired, he didn't do it because he wanted to stop contributing. He did it because his body couldn't keep up anymore, because his knees gave out climbing those construction sites, because his eyes couldn't handle the detailed CAD work anymore. Simone was crying harder now. I didn't know. You didn't want to know, because knowing would mean seeing him as a person instead of an inconvenience. That's not fair, isn't it? When was the last time you asked him about his day? About his life? About anything other than whether he could give you money or get out of your way? She had no answer for that. I walked to the window and looked out at the backyard. Robert was sitting on the bench under the oak tree, the one he'd built himself 15 years ago. His shoulders were hunched, head bowed, and I realized with a sick feeling that he was crying. Robert, who never cried, who'd held it together through his mother's death and his best friend's cancer and every hard thing life had thrown at us. He was breaking. You need to leave, I said without turning around. Mom, now Simone, take whatever you need and go. I want to apologize. He doesn't want to hear it. Not right now, maybe not ever. You can't throw me out forever. I turned to face her. I'm not throwing you out forever. I'm giving you a choice. You can stay gone and keep being the person you were 2 days ago, entitled, selfish, cruel without even meaning to be. Or you can leave and actually do the work to become someone better, someone worthy of the love we've given you. And what if I can't? What if this is who I am? Then that's your answer, isn't it? She grabbed her purse and ran up the stairs. I heard drawers opening, things being thrown into bags. 15 minutes later, she came back down, 2 duffel bags slung over her shoulders. At the door, she paused. I really am sorry, Mom, for what it's worth. It's not worth anything until you understand what you're sorry for. She left. The door closed. And I stood there in the entryway of our home. My home, Robert's home, the home we'd built together through decades of compromise and collaboration and love, and wondered if our daughter would ever find her way back. The next week passed in strange, quiet tension. Robert moved through the house like a ghost. He'd get up, make coffee, read the paper, work in the garden, make dinner. We'd eat together in silence, then retreat to separate corners, him to his workshop in the garage, me to my study with case files I couldn't focus on. At night, lying in bed, I'd feel him beside me, awake, staring at the ceiling. Sometimes I'd reach for his hand. Sometimes he'd let me hold it. Other times he'd pull away, and I'd lie there wondering if my daughter had broken something in him that couldn't be fixed. Simone texted sporadically. Small things, tentative. How's Dad? Is he okay? I'd respond with single words, fine, healing, needs time. Then, 9 days after she'd left, my phone rang at 6:47 a.m. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Is this Claire Dobson? Yes, This is Dr. Patel from Providence Portland Medical Center. Your husband was brought in about 20 minutes ago. He collapsed during a routine checkup with his cardiologist. The world tilted. Collapsed? What do you mean collapsed? He's stable now, but we need you to come in. There are some concerns about his heart function. I don't remember getting dressed. Don't remember driving to the hospital or parking or finding the right floor. I just remember the antiseptic smell and the fluorescent lights and the way Robert looked in that hospital bed, smaller somehow, diminished, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed and quantified his life in numbers and graphs. Mrs. Dobson, Doctor. Patel was a small woman with tired eyes and gentle hands. Your husband experienced what we call a cardiac event. Not a full heart attack, but significant enough that we're concerned. His stress levels are dangerously elevated. Has anything happened recently that might have caused unusual emotional distress? I thought about Robert sitting in the rain. I thought about Simone's words. You're just taking up space. I thought about the way he'd cried under that oak tree, alone, because even after 46 years of marriage, he couldn't bring himself to burden me with the full weight of his heartbreak. Yes, I said quietly. Yes, there's been some stress. We're going to keep him for observation, run some more tests. But Mrs. Dobson, I need to be clear. Emotional stress can be just as dangerous as physical strain, especially for someone his age with his history. Whatever's happening at home, it needs to be addressed. I nodded, not trusting my voice. When the doctor left, I sat beside Robert's bed and took his hand. His eyes fluttered open. Claire, I'm here. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry I'm such a mess. Robert, no. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What she said. That I'm just taking up space. And I started wondering if maybe she was right. If maybe I'm just here because you haven't figured out how to tell me to leave. Robert Dobson, you listen to me. I gripped his hand tighter. You are not taking up space. You are not a burden. You are the best man I have ever known. And what our daughter said was wrong. It was cruel and it was wrong. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know that. He closed his eyes. She's our daughter, Claire. We can't just cut her off. We're not cutting her off. We're letting her face consequences. There's a difference. Is there? Because right now it just feels like we're losing her. Maybe we have to lose her for a little while, so she can find herself. He didn't respond. Just lay there, machines beeping, monitors tracking every fragile beat of his wounded heart. And I sat beside him, holding his hand, and made a decision. I would do whatever it took to protect this man, even if it meant making the hardest choice a mother could make, even if it meant letting my daughter go. I didn't call Simone right away. I sat with that decision for 3 hours while Robert slept and doctors came and went, and the hospital hummed with its efficient, impersonal rhythms of crisis and recovery. Finally, around noon, I sent a text. Your father is in the hospital. Providence, Portland. Room 437. You should come. She was there within 40 minutes. I was standing by the window when she arrived, looking out at the parking lot, at the city beyond, the bridges and buildings Robert had helped shape, the infrastructure of lives he'd never know he'd touched. Mom? Simone's voice was small. What happened? I turned to face her. She looked terrible. Unwashed hair pulled into a messy bun, yesterday's clothes, eyes red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep or both. His heart, I said simply. The stress. It was too much. She moved toward the bed, but I stepped into her path. Before you go over there, I need you to understand something. Your father is lying in that bed because of what you said. Not just the words, but the weight of them. The knowledge that his own daughter sees him as worthless. That broke something in him, Simone, and I don't know if it can be fixed. I know you didn't mean to hurt him. That's almost worse. Because it means the cruelty was casual. Thoughtless. Like he mattered so little that you didn't even have to think before you spoke. Simone's face crumpled. Mom, please, I've been thinking about everything you said, and you're right. I've been selfish and awful and... Stop. I held up a hand. I don't want your apology. Not yet. Because right now, it's just words. And words don't mean anything if they're not backed up by action. Then tell me what to do. Please, just tell me what to do. I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised, this stranger I'd enabled, and felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of a path toward it. You need to change, Simone. Really change. Not because I'm telling you to, and not because you feel guilty, but because you want to become someone better. Someone who sees the value in people beyond what they can do for you. Someone who understands that grace isn't something you deserve. It's something you earn. How? She whispered. How do I do that? That's for you to figure out. Not me. Not your father. You. She stood there, tears streaming down her face, and I saw it. The moment the full weight of what she'd done finally crashed down on her. Not the party. Not the inconvenience. But the deep, fundamental betrayal of a man who'd loved her unconditionally since the moment she was born. Can I see him? She asked. Please. I stepped aside. He's sleeping. Don't wake him. Just sit with him and think about what it would mean to lose him. Really lose him. Forever. She walked to the bedside slowly, like she was approaching something sacred, sat in the chair I'd occupied for hours, and reached out with trembling fingers to touch his hand. Robert stirred but didn't wake, and Simone sat there, watching him breathe, watching the monitors track his heart, and I saw her face change, saw the reality of mortality, his, hers, all of ours, settle into her bones. I left the room then, gave them that space, walked down to the hospital chapel, a small quiet room with rows of empty chairs and a simple cross on the wall. I sat in the back row and closed my eyes. I wasn't Catholic, hadn't been to church in years, but in that moment, I found myself praying anyway. Not for specific outcomes or divine intervention, but for something simpler. The strength to do what was right instead of what was easy. The wisdom to know the difference between enabling and loving. The faith that somewhere, somehow, my daughter could still find her way back to the person she was meant to be. And the grace, please God, the grace, to forgive her when she did. Robert came home 3 days later. The doctors cleared him with a list of instructions as long as my arm, new medications, dietary restrictions, stress reduction protocols, follow-up appointments every 2 weeks. Doctor. Patel pulled me aside before discharge and said something I'd never forget. Your husband's heart is fragile right now. Not just physically. You understand what I'm saying? I understood. I was holding a man made of glass, and one wrong move could shatter everything. Simone hadn't left the hospital except to shower and change clothes. She'd spent those 3 days in that chair by his bedside, sometimes sleeping, sometimes just watching him breathe. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? But I'd catch moments. Her adjusting his blanket, him squeezing her hand briefly before letting go. Small gestures that suggested something might still be salvageable beneath the wreckage. The drive home was quiet. Robert sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the Portland streets like he was seeing them for the first time. We passed Powell's Books, the Saturday Market, the bridges spanning the Willamette, all those landmarks that made up the geography of our life together. I wondered what he was thinking, whether he was remembering the younger man he'd been, the one who'd helped build this city's bones, or whether he was just tired. When we pulled into the driveway, Simone was waiting on the porch. She'd driven separately, arrived ahead of us, and I could see she'd been busy. The front steps were swept clean. The porch light had a new bulb. Small things, but deliberate. Acts of service in place of words she didn't know how to say. Dad, she said as he got out of the car. Let me help you. He waved her off. I can walk, Simone. I know, but let me help anyway. He paused, then nodded. She took his arm, and together they walked up those steps. Slowly, carefully, like they were learning some new dance neither of them had practiced. Inside, the house still smelled faintly of Murphy's oil soap and regret. But Simone had done more than clean the porch. The living room was spotless. The Persian rug had been professionally cleaned. Fresh flowers sat on the mantel. Sunflowers, Robert's favorite, the kind his mother used to grow in her garden in Salem. I picked them up from the farmer's market, Simone said, not quite meeting his eyes. I remembered you liked them. Robert stood there, looking at those flowers, and something in his face softened just slightly. Thank you. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. The first week was awkward. Robert spent most of his time in the bedroom or the workshop, doing small projects, fixing a wobbly chair leg, organizing his tools, anything to keep his hands busy. Simone stayed in her old room, venturing out for meals but mostly keeping to herself. And I moved between them like a diplomat in a war zone, trying to maintain peace while knowing that real healing couldn't be negotiated or managed. On the 8th day, something shifted. I came home from the office to find Simone sitting at the kitchen table with a laptop and a stack of papers. She looked up when I entered, and I saw something different in her expression. Determination, maybe, or the early stirrings of purpose. I enrolled in a certification program, she said without preamble. Social work. There's a community college program that starts in January. I applied yesterday. I should hear back in 2 weeks. I set down my briefcase. Social work? I've been thinking about what you said, about becoming someone better. And I realized I don't even know what that means. I don't know what I'm good at, or what I care about, or how to help people instead of just taking from them. She paused, hands twisting together. So I called the community college, talked to an advisor. She said I could start with a certificate program, see if it fits, and then maybe go for a full degree if I'm serious about it. And are you? Serious about it? I don't know yet, she said honestly, but I want to try. I want to try being someone who helps instead of hurts. Behind her, Robert stood in the doorway. I hadn't heard him come in. His face was unreadable, but he was listening. What made you choose social work? I asked carefully. Simone glanced down at her hands. I've been spending time at St. Vincent de Paul, the soup kitchen downtown, just volunteering, serving meals, talking to people. And there's this woman who comes in, maybe 75, always sits at the same table. Last week she told me about her son, how he moved away, stopped calling, made her feel like she didn't matter anymore. And her voice cracked. I saw Dad in her. I saw what I did to him, and I thought, if I could learn how to help people like her, maybe I could start to understand how to help myself. The silence that followed felt sacred. Robert took a step into the room, then another, until he was standing beside the table. When do you start? He asked quietly. Simone looked up at him, hope flickering in her eyes. January 7th, if I get accepted. He nodded slowly. I know someone on the advisory board, Howard Chen. We worked together on the water treatment expansion. Good man. If you need a reference. You'd do that? After everything You're my daughter, Simone. That doesn't change just because you made mistakes. It changes if you refuse to learn from them. She stood abruptly, like she wanted to hug him, but something held her back. The wound was too fresh, the hurt too deep. So instead, she just said, "Thank you, Dad. Really, thank you." He didn't respond, just turned and walked back toward his workshop, but I saw it. The slight relaxation in his shoulders, the smallest easing of the tension he'd been carrying like a physical weight. That night, lying in bed, Robert spoke into the darkness. Do you think she means it? Or is this just another phase? I don't know, I admitted. But for the first time, I think she wants to mean it. And maybe that's enough to start with. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, I've been thinking about what the doctor said, about stress and emotions and taking care of myself. And I realized something, Claire. I've spent so much of my life trying to be useful, building things, fixing things, solving problems. When I retired, I lost that. And Simone's words, they just confirmed what I'd been afraid of all along, that without my work, I was nothing. Robert, let me finish. He reached for my hand in the dark. But then I was lying in that hospital bed, watching the monitors, thinking about dying. And I realized I was wrong. My value isn't in what I build or fix. It's in how I love, how I treat people, the small kindnesses, the daily choice to be present. I forgot that. And maybe Simone did too. I squeezed his hand. You've always known that. You just needed to remember. I'm trying. But it's hard, Claire. It's so hard to let go of who you used to be and accept who you are now. I know. We lay there in the dark, hands intertwined, and I thought about all the versions of ourselves we'd been over the decades. The young couple who'd bought this house with more hope than money, the new parents terrified of breaking their fragile daughter, the middle-aged professionals juggling careers and parenthood, and now this. Two people in the autumn of their lives trying to figure out how to age with dignity while raising a daughter who'd forgotten how to see them as human. The weeks that followed had a rhythm to them, tentative, fragile, but forward-moving. Robert started attending a cardiac rehabilitation program at the hospital, exercising with other heart patients under supervised care. He came home tired but lighter somehow, like the company of people who understood his fragility made it easier to bear. Simone got accepted into the social work program. When the letter arrived, she brought it to Robert first, not me. I watched from the kitchen as she showed him, her hands trembling, and saw him read it twice before looking up and saying, "I'm proud of you." Just those 4 words, but they landed like absolution. She started therapy too. A counselor named Dr. Reeves who specialized in family systems and young adult transitions. Once a week, every Thursday at 4 o'clock, Simone would drive to that office on Hawthorne and sit in a room and do the hard work of examining why she'd become the person she'd been. Sometimes she'd come home red-eyed and raw. Other times she'd seem almost hopeful. And slowly, session by session, I watched her start to understand something crucial. That the person she'd been wasn't fixed or permanent. That change was possible, but only through sustained, uncomfortable effort. In December, she asked Robert if he'd teach her about his work. Not for school, not for any reason except that she wanted to know. So on Saturday mornings, they started sitting together in the living room, and Robert would pull out old project files and blueprints and explain how you calculate load-bearing capacity, how you account for seismic activity, how you build something meant to last. I'd watch them from the kitchen, pretending to read the paper, and feel something unclench in my chest. They weren't fixed. They might never be fully fixed. But they were trying. One morning, Robert spread out plans for the Fremont Bridge, his first major project, and traced the lines with his weathered finger. See this stress point here? Everyone said it wouldn't hold, that I was too young, too inexperienced to understand the forces at play. But I ran the calculations 50 times. I knew it would hold. And did it? Simone asked. Still standing. 40 years later, still standing. He looked at her then, really looked at her. Sometimes the strongest structures are the ones that bend, Simone, the ones that allow for movement and shift and change. It's the rigid ones that break. She understood the metaphor. I saw it in her face, the way her eyes filled, and she had to look away. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything, for not seeing you, for making you feel small, for all of it." Robert reached across the blueprints and took her hand. "I know. Can you forgive me?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm working on it. Some days are easier than others, but I'm working on it." It was the most honest answer he could give, and somehow, that honesty was its own kind of grace. Christmas came quietly that year. We didn't do the usual elaborate decorations or the big family dinner. Instead, it was just the three of us, a small tree in the corner, and a meal I made from Robert's mother's old recipes, pot roast and mashed potatoes and green beans cooked in bacon fat, the kind of food that felt like comfort even when comfort was hard to come by. After dinner, Simone disappeared upstairs and came back down with 2 wrapped packages. She handed one to each of us, her hands shaking slightly. Robert opened his first. Inside was a framed photograph, one I'd never seen before. It showed him at 35, standing in front of the newly completed Max light rail, hard hat under his arm, grin splitting his face. He was pointing at something off camera, and you could see the pride in his stance, the satisfaction of a job well done. "I found it in the Portland archives," Simone said softly. "I've been going through old city records for a project, learning about the infrastructure, the history, and I saw this and I thought you should have it. So you remember who you are, who you've always been." Robert stared at that photograph for a long time. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. "Thank you," he managed. I opened mine next. It was a journal, leather-bound, expensive, with my initials embossed on the cover. Inside, on the first page, Simone had written, "Mom, I don't have the words yet to explain everything I'm feeling, but I'm learning. This journal is for you to write your own story. Not as my mother, not as Robert's wife, but as Claire. Because I realized I've never asked about your story. About who you were before us, what you wanted, what you sacrificed. I'm sorry I took you for granted. I'm sorry I only saw you as roles instead of as a person. I'm learning to see differently now. I love you. S." I closed the journal and looked at my daughter. She was watching me with those eyes that used to be so careless, so sure of their place in the world. Now they were uncertain, seeking, but honest in a way they hadn't been before. "Thank you," I said. This is perfect." We sat there in the living room, the three of us, surrounded by the remnants of dinner and the soft glow of Christmas lights. And for the first time in months, it felt like we might actually be a family again. Not the family we'd been before. That version was gone, shattered by rain and cruelty and a daughter's thoughtless words. But maybe something better. Something built on truth instead of comfort. On accountability instead of enabling. On the hard-won knowledge that love isn't enough if it isn't paired with respect. New Year's came, and with it, a brutal cold snap that turned Portland's rain into ice. The city shut down the way it always did. Portlanders, for all their pride in handling weather, had never quite figured out how to drive on ice. Simone's classes started on January 7th as scheduled. She threw herself into them with an intensity I'd never seen before. Up early, staying late, filling notebooks with observations and theories and questions. She talked about her professors, about the readings, about the clients she'd eventually work with. One evening in late January, she came home and found Robert in the living room, struggling to open a jar of pasta sauce. His hands shook. The medication, the doctor had said, a temporary side effect. And I watched him try 3 times before giving up. Simone walked over without a word, took the jar, opened it, and handed it back. "Want me to start the water?" she asked. "Sure." They moved around the kitchen together, her chopping vegetables, him stirring sauce, working in tandem the way we used to when she was young and eager to help with dinner. And I realized this was it. This was the real work of reconciliation. Not grand gestures or tearful apologies, but showing up day after day, doing small things with attention and care. After dinner, Simone asked Robert if he wanted to take a walk. The ice had melted, leaving everything wet and gleaming under the streetlights. He hesitated. It was cold, his energy was limited, but something in her expression made him say yes. I watched from the window as they walked down the block, side by side. Robert's steps were careful, measured. Simone matched his pace. They weren't touching, weren't talking, but there was something companionable in their silence. They were gone for 20 minutes. When they came back, Robert's cheeks were flushed from the cold, but he was smiling. A real smile, not the careful, guarded expression he'd been wearing for months. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Good," he said simply. "We're good." Simone nodded, not quite meeting my eyes, but I saw it there. Relief, gratitude, the beginning of peace. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I pulled out the journal Simone had given me and wrote, January 28th. Today felt like we turned a corner. Not back to where we were. We can never go back, but towards something new, something earned. I've spent my career helping families navigate crisis, representing parents in custody battles, advocating for children in impossible situations. But I never fully understood how fragile family bonds really are until mine nearly broke. We raise our children with the hope that they'll become good people. We pour everything we have into them: time, money, love, patience. And sometimes, despite all that, they become people we don't recognize. People who hurt us without meaning to, who take our sacrifices for granted, who forget that we're human too. But sometimes, if we're lucky, if we're willing to demand better instead of just accepting what is, they find their way back. Not all at once, not cleanly or perfectly, but in small moments, in opened jars and evening walks and the quiet choice to keep trying. Robert is healing, not just his heart, but his spirit. And Simone is becoming someone I'm starting to recognize again, someone I might even be proud of, given time. As for me, I'm learning that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable harm. That's saying no, setting boundaries, demanding accountability. These aren't failures of compassion. They're expressions of it. We're not finished yet. This story doesn't have a neat ending. But for the first time in months, I believe we might actually survive this. And maybe, if we're very fortunate and very brave, we might even come out stronger. I closed the journal and turned off the light. In the darkness, I could hear Robert breathing beside me, steady, strong, alive. And down the hall, Simone's door was closed, but a light showed underneath it. Still awake, still working, still trying. The rain had started again, gentle now, tapping against the windows like an old friend returning. I listened to it and thought about all the storms we'd weathered, all the ways we'd bent without breaking, and I allowed myself, for the first time in a long time, to hope. Spring arrived slowly in Portland, the way it always did. A suggestion of warmth, then cold again, then sun breaking through clouds like a promise kept. By March, the city had shaken off winter's gray blanket and burst into bloom. Cherry blossoms on Waterfront Park, tulips in the Pearl, that particular green that only existed in the Pacific Northwest. Simone finished her first semester with straight A's. More importantly, she'd found something she was good at: listening to people, really hearing them, seeing the humanity in their struggles. Her professors praised her empathy. Her clients, the ones she worked with through practicum placements, responded to her in ways that suggested she'd found her calling. Robert started a consulting business from home. Small projects mostly, young engineers seeking advice, municipalities needing expertise on old infrastructure. It wasn't about the money. It was about remembering that he still had something to offer, that his knowledge and experience had value beyond what his body could physically do. And I kept practicing law, kept fighting for families in crisis, but I did it with new eyes, understanding that the work of love isn't always gentle, that sometimes you have to let people face the consequences of their actions, even when every instinct says to protect them. One Saturday in April, the three of us drove out to the coast, Cannon Beach, where we'd vacationed when Simone was little, building sandcastles at the base of Haystack Rock and collecting agates until our pockets were full of ocean-tumbled stones. We walked the beach in the afternoon sun, seagulls wheeling overhead, waves crashing with that particular Oregon coast ferocity. Robert moved slowly, carefully, but his color was good, his breathing steady, and when Simone offered her arm at a rough patch, he took it without hesitation. We found a spot near the rock and sat in the sand, looking out at the Pacific. That vast, indifferent beauty that had been here long before us and would remain long after we were gone. "I used to bring you here when you were 3, Robert said to Simone. "You'd chase the waves, screaming every time they came close. You were fearless then. No concept of danger, just pure joy." Simone smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "I wish I could go back. Tell that little girl to stay fearless, but learn kindness too." "You can't go back," I said gently. "None of us can. We can only move forward and try to do better." She nodded, looking out at the water. "I think about that night all the time, seeing you standing there, Dad, in the rain. And I wonder, what kind of person does that? What kind of daughter looks at her father and sees a problem instead of a person?" "A scared one," Robert said quietly. "A lost one. Someone who hadn't learned yet that making other people small doesn't make you bigger." "Have I learned it now?" He considered this. "You're learning it. That's what matters." We sat there until the sun started to drop, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. And as the light changed, I thought about all the versions of our family that had existed over the years, the perfect image we'd tried to maintain, the fractures we'd ignored, the crisis that had nearly destroyed us, and now this, something fragile and honest and real. "Thank you," Simone said suddenly, "for not giving up on me, for making me leave, for making me face what I'd done. Thank you for loving me enough to let me fail." I looked at Robert. He looked at me. And in that glance, we shared an entire conversation about the impossibility of parenting, about the pain of watching your child stumble, about the courage it takes to step back and let them find their own way. "We love you," I said simply. "We always have, even when we didn't like you very much." She laughed, a real laugh, not forced or performative. "That's fair." The drive home was quiet, but it was a good quiet, comfortable. The silence of people who'd weathered something hard together and come out the other side. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as always. Solid, welcoming, full of history and hope. We climbed those front steps together, the three of us. And I thought about that night in November when I'd found Robert sitting in the rain. So much had changed since then. Robert's health, Simone's direction, my own understanding of what it meant to be a mother. But the house remained. The structure held, because Robert had been right all those months ago when he'd talked about the Fremont Bridge. The strongest structures aren't the rigid ones. They're the ones that bend, that allow for movement and change, that weather storms without breaking. We were that structure. Bent but not broken, changed but not destroyed. Inside, I made tea while Robert settled into his chair with the evening paper, and Simone spread her textbooks across the kitchen table. Just another evening. Just another moment in the long, ordinary miracle of family life. But as I stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the street where rain was just beginning to fall again, light this time, gentle, the kind that nourished rather than punished, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Gratitude. Not for what we'd been through, but for what we'd become because of it. For the hard lessons learned, the painful growth earned, the understanding that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just comfortable cruelty dressed up as kindness. Robert looked up from his paper and caught my eye. Smiled that small, secret smile that after 46 years of marriage still made my heart catch. And Simone, absorbed in her textbook, absently reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. A gesture she'd inherited from him, one of 1,000 small ways she carried us both forward into whatever future she was building. The rain kept falling, soft and steady, washing clean what needed washing, nourishing what needed to grow. And we sat together in our home, our structure, our shelter, our sacred ordinary space, and let it, because that's what families do. They weather, they bend, they hold, and sometimes, if they're very lucky, they heal. The end. I had just arrived from a trip when I found my husband outside in the rain while my daughter was having a party. When I asked why, she said, "He's old, he ruins the mood." I just left and made a call that left them in shock.